Hi, I'm Alexandra Lloyd, a French-Canadian who's called Birmingham, Alabama home since 2017. Welcome to From Where to Here, the podcast that celebrates the rich diversity of languages, cultures, and the stories that connect us all. Each month, I'll sit down with inspiring guests from different backgrounds to explore their cultures, languages, and tackle some fun in our Truth, Dare, or Debunk segment. Whether you're a language enthusiast, a culture lover, or just curious about the world, you're in the right place. Let's dive into your next favorite cultural adventure. Today's guest is a professor of Spanish at the Department of World Languages and Literatures at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. For people that are local, you know it as UAB, where he has taught Spanish, Portuguese, and Latin American literature and culture in those languages. He has even received prestigious awards like the President's and Dean's Awards for Excellence in Teaching in 2023 and a 2025 Fulbright Fellowship in Brazil. He specializes in the cultures of the African diaspora in Latin America, particularly the Hispanic Caribbean in Brazil. His academic publications include 2 books of literacy criticism on authors from Brazil, Colombia, and Puerto Rico. Today, we're going to be exploring his journey from U.S. classrooms to Caribbean stories, busting cultural myths, and diving into Latin American and Caribbean literature, especially around the African diaspora and identity. Dr. John Maddox, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Lexi. It's an honor to be here.
Now, can we go back to the beginning? And if you could tell us, do you remember what first got you curious about language and culture? Was there a particular moment that started this journey for you?
Yes, I had a great Spanish 1 teacher in high school. I lived in a lot of small towns in Georgia growing up, and I moved to a new school in a small town called Alamo, and we had a very good high school, and it was small. And the language department was Juana. So everybody took Spanish, and I ended up in her Spanish, English, and journalism class, and she took a group of students abroad, which was my first time out of the country. And I thought that was just a magical thing. It was a talent I didn't know I had of learning languages, and it was a way to connect with a big world, and that was really exciting to me. And it created a community for me that's really lasted all my life since then. I ended up knowing I was going to be a Spanish teacher. I presumed it would be a high school teacher like Juana. But when I went to the University of Georgia, I found out, hey, maybe I could teach college. And so here I am now. We had no textbooks. We had a lot of stories. She would tell us stories about her family in Spanish. And of course, this is Spanish 1. It has to be accessible to us. It has to be engaging for us. So she used a lot of games. She was a very creative person. She would make up stories and would involve us in telling the story. It's a method they call TPR, which is related to learning languages through stories. Yeah. And we would play kind of like board games or parlor games in the language, which is a method that we use to this day, because language learning should be fun. It should be creative. And, I did a little interview with her when I was thinking about, okay, well, what kind of job do I want to get? Which, one of those activities you do in high school. And she said, I don't work for a living per se. I play. And I wanted a job where I felt like I was playing, or in the sense that I get to be creative and I get to connect with people and I'm having fun.
And when you say games, so you're saying also you just started learning the language. You're already getting that immersion through stories, games, just contextual learning too. Right. What kind of games can you play with just minimum understanding of Spanish for people out there that they're like, okay, that sounds great. I want to hear the stories. I want to maybe tell some. Right. I want to be involved in that game, but I have no clue what I'm doing and I'm just starting out. How would that work, or what would you recommend?
Well, the simplest one is 2 truths and a lie. There are a variety of card games that you'd play. What we do to teach the students numbers is you play a game it's similar to 21, right? Where you want to get as close to 21 without going over, right? Only we play 99, so you learn how to count to 100. So you want to get as close to 99 without going over. And well, you add cards to the pile. And so you would add the two numbers of the top card on the pile and the one that you're adding. And it tends to add up quite quickly. The goal is to get to 99 without going over. It's kind of like Uno in the sense that you have different numbers that can be like wild cards, that can change the direction, that can make it reset to 98 or 99. Yeah, you're playing cards, you're talking to people, you're interacting with them, but you're also picking up how to use numbers in a way that's not just memorizing them in order.
Were you particularly good in math? Would you say that? Or
No.
was just, okay. And something that caught my attention was you said, I didn't realize until that time that I had a talent for learning languages. I think there's different people that might think, yeah, you're either talented at it or you're not. So they consider themselves not when they can't speak the language. But then there's, I think, another group of people that think of it as, you can learn the language, you just gotta do the work for it. Like, how do you look at this? Do you really think you have a talent to learn languages because it just comes naturally to you in a way?
I think we all have our own tastes, we have our own talents, we have things that come easily to us. So this was an area that came easier to me. That doesn't mean that it's an either or situation. There are this certain tiny group of people that can just easily pick up languages like a sponge. That's not exactly correct about anything that you learn in life. For some people, it's easier to do math. For some people, it's easier to do sports. For some people, that's just how we are balanced or slightly imbalanced as people. I would say that anybody can learn a language. Everyone should learn a language. And it's not for the reasons that you typically see in movies. I always hear that people say that you've mastered a language when you can dream in it. First off, you can dream in bad Portuguese. I've dreamt in bad Portuguese. So I had a dream where I was at McDonald's and I had just learned the word for raspberry, which was morango silvestre. It's just wild strawberry, right? And it sounds a lot like the word frango, chicken. So I had gone to McDonald's and I'd ordered the wild chicken, and that was my dream. And so who did that help? Who did I connect with that? I don't know who decided that was the way that you measure mastery. We talk a lot more now about proficiency, which sounds like hair splitting, yes, but the difference is, can you use language to accomplish some kind of task or to communicate the message that you want to get across? On some level, that will always be imperfect. Just having a conversation, like I just got back from Brazil. I was just talking to my wife and mother-in-law this morning, both of whom are Brazilian. And I asked if my Portuguese sounded any different after a semester abroad. And they said, no, you sound fluent. You sound the same as you did before. You still have an accent, though. And I said, okay, well, the perfectionist side of me was a little disappointed, but that's the reality is, okay, you're going to have an accent in another language, especially if you learn it as an adult. If you pick it up as a kid, you're probably not going to have an accent, but you'll know what a kid knows. I mean, we're not all discussing astrophysics in the 6th grade, right? I think that learning another language is an exercise in patience, an exercise in seeing the impossibility of perfection or the downside to perfectionism. I think that it's healthy to want to constantly be better at something. I'm thrilled about being able to always learn something from somebody. I learn stuff from little kids, right? If nothing else, what they call something or another in their slang and their language at home. But it's a process where you're going to be imperfect, but from Spanish 1, Portuguese 1, French 1, whatever you're in, you're still going to be getting your point across. And you're going to polish what you're saying gradually, just like when we're writing an essay You write a first draft, a second draft, a third draft. It's the same thing with a language. You start out with saying burger, and then you point, right? Language learning always starts out with pointing a lot.
Yeah, a lot of gestures.
Right, so burger, okay. Well, then you move on to I want a burger, and then maybe you didn't say the verb the way that you're supposed to, okay? Then you learn to conjugate it. You sound more and more natural. Eventually, you'll be like me. Yeah, you gotta get an accent that I can't quite place. Yeah. Right? And that accent will always be there, and it's part of where you come from. They always say that it's a sign of bravery too, because
I couldn't agree more with that.
Right. Yeah. So you're going through a process of trial and error, of learning as you go. You're going to make mistakes, but you're also going to connect with people. You're going to learn a lot, and you're going to meet people that you wouldn't otherwise.
Connect with people. That's what it comes down to. What a better way to connect with someone than speaking their native language. And we're going to talk more about your trip to Brazil. I'm excited to hear, because it's not your first time either going to Brazil. Speaking of proficiency, how many languages are you proficient in?
I'm proficient in Spanish, English, and Portuguese. Portuguese is a more scattered language than Spanish is. You may have heard of the Royal Spanish Academy. They're the people that write the dictionaries and they determine the official grammar rules that you get taught in school. Portuguese is much more scattered, so I say that because I have a lot of respect for people from Portugal, Lusophone Africa, but sometimes they have to repeat themselves because it's a very different way of speaking. And my French is Duolingo French. I just finished my first year of Duolingo.
Yay!
So I can read pretty well, and I'm still pointing a lot.
That's awesome. You are so well versed. So now Spanish, French are romantic languages. Portuguese, is it considered a romantic languages too?
Yes.
Okay. So do you have a natural affinity for romantic languages, or is there a common theme that you see? And maybe with your studies, there's something that you just have a natural affinity, or that kind of like bring them all together more than, let's say, an Asian language?
It's easier.
It's easier?
It's easier, so that's part of it. I got the bright idea last year to take an online course with UNAM, which is the biggest and most famous university in Mexico. And it was hieroglyphics. It was Mayan hieroglyphics. The problem is, and I thought it was going to be like, okay, the jaguar represents power and the water means life. No. You have to be able to speak Maya, or a dialect of Maya. There's 20 dialects of Maya today. Classical Maya, don't get it mixed up, right? So it's the difference between what Greek people speak today versus classical Greek, right? And so I was listening to this beautiful academic Spanish, Mexican Spanish from this professor. He's an anthropologist, but oh my gosh, they have 3 different ways of even thinking about a word. So you'll have water, okay, I understand that, so it looks like a little wave, but they have water with a dot, which sounds like, the combination of which sounds like another word in Maya. And I couldn't wrap my head around it. That was just too tough for me. So it's a common error in Spanish to say that somebody speaks a Mayan dialect, and it sounds like they're saying dialect of Spanish. No, it is like Mandarin or something completely unrelated. Portuguese, Spanish, and French are much more closely related languages. I would say that in my experience, Spanish and Portuguese are the most closely related languages. Well, I didn't learn a whole bunch of other ones to compare them to, but they've always had a shared history. So it's a history of neighbors and rivals. The word rival comes from the word for river, right? So if you think about the old days, you would have one group of people on one side of the river, and they had disagreement or whatever. Somebody moved to the other side of the river, right? And so they're constantly competing for access to that river, access to resources, access to transportation. I mean, river is something that determined people's lives in a way even more so than we see today in the past. And so they're kind of like siblings. They've always been next to one another. They're made of the same stuff. What does that mean? They were both part of the Roman Empire, so they inherited that heritage. They're both Catholic nations. Famously, Columbus left Spain and then did a trick and returned to Portugal. Some people say that he was trying to see who would give him a better offer as far as how much of the new world he was going to get and how much of his resources, which is a very shrewd game that nobles would play. Because the Pope said, all right, your slice of the Americas, what in Spanish and Portuguese you typically call America to this day, your slice is over here, Spain, your slice is over here, Portugal. The two squabbling siblings moved over to the other side of the Atlantic and kind of continued to squabble over whatever the conflict of the day was, up to football rivalries, like soccer rivalries between Argentina and Brazil to this day. They're very much culturally connected. They are very much connected in terms of language. If you've not had any experience with this language, I think the big difference between Spanish and Portuguese for an American is we're constantly exposed to some aspect of Spanish-speaking culture, even if it's Taco Bell. I think most of us know Taco Bell is not Mexico, right? Yeah. Even growing up, we're like, that talking Chihuahua feels like something's left out, right? But we think we know something about Mexico. So we feel more familiar with Spanish, right? The accent, different cultures, that kind of thing. Whereas Portuguese, we have less contact with it, so we're a little more taken aback. So the first reaction is, this is funny Spanish. No, it's just a different language that has a lot in common because of that shared history. And French I'm picking up because, UAB has a great French program. I've got the resources to do that. I would love to learn more about the French-speaking Caribbean. And it's part of learned society all throughout the 18th and 19th century. And so it's just helping my understanding of the other languages that I've studied in, and certainly in literature.
That is amazing. Did you ever learn languages simultaneously? Do you consider you learning them simultaneously, or do you learn some of the basics of one language and then you move to the next one? What has been the winning approach in your case?
Learning them both at the same time. I'm just going to go back to my origin story with Portuguese, which is also the origin story of me and my wife.
Yeah, so love to hear, because how did you two meet?
Yes, thank you. I knew that I wanted to be a Spanish teacher. I went to a junior college just to do my core and all that kind of thing, called Waycross College, and I went to the University of Georgia. Since I knew I wanted to do everything that I could with Spanish, they had an immersion dorm, which at the time was called Maryland Hall, sorry. They had a Spanish community and a French community. And the guys' community was always very small, right? Languages is, most of your classes are going to be majority female. So they put the French and the Spanish guys on half of a hall. The other half was women studying French, and the other side of the hall was women studying Spanish. And all of my friends were trilingual. And I started feeling left out. I'm like, well, I don't want to be the dummy that only speaks two languages. So I said, okay, well, should I study French? Should I study Portuguese? For the reasons that I've explained before. One of the young women in the Spanish side will learn Portuguese to talk to me and my roommate. Well, 20 years later, I'm still talking to her. Her name is Luciana Silva. And I actually went to Vanderbilt University with her roommate. She's still a good friend of the family. So it really changed my life. I met my wife, and I always tell students, I can't guarantee you're going to meet your soulmate by studying another language, but you will meet people that you wouldn't otherwise. I never felt, University of Georgia is a big frat school, right? That Greek life is really big there. I never really felt compelled to do Greek life or anything.
When you say Greek life, what do you mean?
Okay, at least in the south of the U.S., and I think it happens to a lesser degree in the north. In the north, you have the Ivies, which in the old days had the clubmen, right? But Greek life is sororities and fraternities. So it's very much associated with football culture, with the alumni associations. And so typically, if you go to a school like University of Alabama, University of Georgia, you'll see these mansions. And you're like, well, why do the students get mansions? Well, that's not the student's mansion. It's the Greek organization that's been there for a long time. And they call it Greek life because it's always 2 or 3 Greek letters.
Yes. Okay. I wasn't familiar with that terminology, but I know about the fraternities and sororities. Okay. Right. So that's something I just learned. in terms of how they are referred to, if you will.
Welcome to Alabama.
Yeah, yeah.
But I never really felt a need to join that organization because my fraternity, in a bigger sense of the word, my community, was the fact that I speak Spanish. And so if I met somebody who was a Spanish speaker, a native speaker, I'd already have something in common with them. If nothing else, I would have the interest in their country. And I think that was a myth that I busted by studying new languages. You always hear the myth that native speakers are always going to be jerks. In the United States, historically and sadly, they would put Latino or Latinx students in special ed classes, or if they started a school for Native Americans, everything would be only in English, and they would be punished for speaking their first language. Right?
I have heard about that. Yes,
very severely, and I know that it was. There's been a lot of discussion in Canada about similar colonial enterprises. So I think with that baggage, I think that, or we'll project a lot of our stuff onto the French, right? Mm-hmm. And so we'll say, oh, well, they're going to be snobby to me. They're going to say, oh, you said this wrong, and they're going to make me feel bad. That wasn't my experience with Spanish and really with any of my French classes at all, because people are grateful that you're making an effort to listen to them and to understand them, even if you don't get it right the first time. And I found that very encouraging because it's the opposite. I was scared to study another language because I thought that people would laugh at me, that they'd make fun of me. Middle school and high school are not the times when one feels most secure in themselves, right? But I found that people were very encouraging. And so that gave me an immediate connection with the Spanish immersion dorm where I lived, but also with the Spanish-speaking community there at the University of Georgia.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you have surrounded yourself with other like-minded people that welcome, and it's like you have a safe space to make errors. I found that oftentimes the people that end up not having bad intentions necessarily, but that are most likely to laugh about how you pronounce certain words are the people that actually don't speak another language. So interestingly enough, you spend a lot of time in different parts of the world, living and working abroad, including Brazil, obviously. Was there a moment during that time that made you see American culture or even yourself differently?
I had a blast at the University of Georgia. It was great. I got the chance to study in Mexico and then in Puerto Rico. And I think that gave me an experience that few students have at the undergraduate level, even at the University of Georgia, because the classic study abroad is to go to Spain, which makes a lot of sense. My first trip abroad in high school was to Spain. It's a very safe place. It's a place where we get a lot of teachers from there. It's a wonderful place with beautiful museums and all of that. But that kind of pushes students in one direction, and I got the chance to go in a different direction. I went to a town called Jalapa, which is near Veracruz, right there on the Caribbean coast. Jalapa's farther inland. At the town, it was a sleepy little mountain town. It's a college town. And I was seen as a unique person and as somewhat of a curiosity because these were people that didn't interact with Americans every day. They didn't see Americans walking around Jalapa every day. It wasn't a big tourist spot at the time, at least not for internationals. And we got to do classroom observations. It was through the education department there at the University of Georgia. And so we'd go and observe different classrooms. And really my favorite experience was to go out to a village where they grow mangoes. That's their job. That is that is the only source of income, and that's what you live your life around. Of course, you have your little river there. And yes, it had dirt roads and a donkey and at least I saw a donkey. I don't know how many donkeys they had. And they had a one-room schoolhouse. That was a great learning experience, but we were treated like rock stars as the Americans are here. I think kids get bored around the globe and they find ways to entertain themselves. It's like, the big, strange, pale guy is here. All right, let's go play. They like to play tic-tac-toe, el gato. We had a great education professor, Misha Kahneman, that was there. She'd make faces with the kids and play around with them. And then they go on recess and they're like, take us to the river. Let's go to the river. That's like the river is the best thing in the world. Of course, you get to play around. You get to swim. They have a little rope, like a tire swing kind of thing. To be seen as different because of, yes, the way I look, but also my cultural background. For other people to be curious about me was very interesting for me. It's exciting. And it was the first time that I could objectify my lived experience. I know that there are a lot of negative associations with the word objectify, of course, but to be able to take a step back and become a little less emotional or a little less defensive about how people perceive me was very helpful. And it's kind of helped me to gain a sense of humor, right? Laughing about me saying a word wrong, laughing about, maybe I do need to get out in the sun a little more, or laughing about whatever, right? My socks are too high, or whatever is different about me in a different context. First, to be able to laugh about it, and second, to say, well, there's more than one way to live. There's more than one way to skin a cat, right? That was the beginning of being able to divorce myself from a little bit of the sensitivity of being seen as the other, without exaggerating how much they othered me. They were happy to see me, most of them. Maybe I had a good friend who's my friend to this day, a guy named Domingo, and he would say, maybe a guy on the street gave me a bad look while I was walking down the sidewalk. My friend said, well, sometimes they think you don't know anything about us, or they saw something on the news they didn't like, and they think you had something to do with it. And to be able to take a step back and say, sometimes people will have a negative reaction. It's not all about me. Yeah.
Oh, that's so good. It's so easy to go that path, though. Mm-hmm. Because it's the easy way.
Right. You'll hear people say, okay, this country is anti-American. Well, first off, that's a really big statement. But sometimes people will have a reaction, and it's not about being pro or anti-American. Maybe they don't like something that the president did. I'm not the president. And I think that people understand that. And I think that going to Puerto Rico was also something that helped me to understand that, because...
In what ways,
Yeah, Puerto Rico is a place where, again, I was seen very different. I looked different from most people there. I was an oddity because I was in classes for native speakers. And you would hear things about the U.S. government because that's their government, whether they want it or not. And I think that Puerto Rico is a place where I came to understand what we call cultural nationalism is a case of that. Catalonia, we say Catalunya is a case of that. In Spain, where you have a very healthy, clearly defined identity of this community. Yeah. Regardless of what currency you use, regardless of the history of colonization, they would be very critical. And that, some people would say, at the time it was Vieques. Vieques was a Navy base for many years. It was a firing range. And so it was very polluted, was protested a lot at the time. Since then, they've shut it down. It's still very polluted. And so you would hear people that have valid concerns, and it's against the U.S. government. It's against something that America is very proud of, which is its army, its armed forces. But you get to learn different perspectives and to depersonalize them and to see both sides of the coin, or maybe you start to think about maybe there's more than just one or two sides to this argument.
So you mentioned it's similar to Quebec, and I like what you said. I'm curious about Puerto Rico. What makes it that they have a strong culture? Like Quebec, one that is pretty obvious is the language. One of the official languages is French, which is very different from the rest of Canada. Has Puerto Rico, maybe the language is part of it, but are there other areas, or what stands out to you as Puerto Rico, they have their own culture and they dissociate themselves from the rest of the U.S.?
First, I'm going to recognize that I got a somewhat of a skewed perspective. I was studying at the University of Puerto Rico in Rio Piedras. The history of Puerto Rico informs its political parties, and it's going to help me answer your question. Okay. So most of the Spanish Empire in the 19th century declared independence. The only little holdouts were Cuba and Puerto Rico. And Spain didn't want to lose Cuba because Cuba had that great sugar money, sugar and tobacco and enslaved Africans that were making that happen. And it was horrible, it was brutal, but it paid the bills. So when the United States invaded in 1898 in Puerto Rico was seen, and Cuba, countries that just didn't develop right because everybody else was declaring independence, but they did not, or honestly could not. I think ever since then, there's been, even within Spanish-speaking communities, an othering of Puerto Rico. They'll say, oh, that's part of the United States. They're not part of Latin America. In my experience, most of the people in Puerto Rico view themselves as Latin Americans. If they live on the island, they definitely live in Spanish. And that's been a point of pride for them, because we talked earlier about schools for Native Americans. Well, the American government got the bright idea to do the same thing in Puerto Rico, but they were not interested. From the 1920s, 1930s to this day, you'll have people that they study English, but it's in many cases it's going to be kind of like studying Spanish or French. Yeah. You learn some to get by. Well, they also have a movie theater, and the movie theater typically is going to have 90, if not 100% movies in English, right? So they're immersed in the media of the English language. But what you speak at home, what you speak with your friends, what you sing in, famously, we get Bad Bunny conquering the planet right now, is the Spanish language. There's a lot of misunderstanding regarding Puerto Rican Spanish. The number one and most obvious influence on it is, of course, the English language, because of this shared history. And many people, because they're U.S. citizens, they have U.S. passports, they can travel the 50 United States freely, and many people will come to the United States, in many cases to work. Maybe you'll go back to retire on the island, or a million combinations of coming and going between the continental United States. They have contact with the English language, but most people are not going to live their lives in that language on the island. And many of them will, unless they're college educated and pursue English in their career, they're not going to speak fluent English. So in Puerto Rican Spanish, the word for counter is counter, el counter, right? Okay, let me get a dollar out of my wallet. All right, the sentence, I'm going to get $1 out of my wallet. Voy a sacar un peso de mi wallet.
De mi wallet.
De mi wallet, yeah. So, yeah, and of course they'll call the U.S. money by Spanish names. You got a peso, peseta, bellón, all right? So those are examples of cultural resistance, really, yeah, of preserving a culture that had a big media boom, especially in the 50s and 60s, of pride in things that are uniquely Puerto Rican, of the island. So you've got a pride of place, which is also pride in their dialect, which would not only be influenced by English, but also by being kind of in the margins of the Spanish Empire, and now in many ways in the margins of the U.S. Empire. Mm-hmm. And so you'll see people using older words, or words that just aren't used anywhere else. Like the most useful word I've found is Zafacón.
What does that mean?
That's one of the classics, is Zafacón. A Zafacón is the trash can. Oh. Right? So in Spain, they'll call it a papelera, the thing you put paper in. All right, you'll at Mexico, bote de basura, the bucket of trash, right? Mm-hmm. But it's a Zafacón. And there are all these different theories as to where that came from. Most people will say it came from the English safety can. The problem is that nobody says safety can in English. So I don't know where they get that idea from. And I'm guessing, well, maybe in the Navy, I don't know. It comes from the word safa, which is related to an Arabic term, which means the thing where you'll read in the Bible about people washing each other's feet, right? So in the Arabic-speaking world, of course, you've got many people that live in desert environments, that kind of thing. You wash your feet when you come to somebody's house. The Zafacón, or the safa, right, is the bucket or the box or the container that would gather the waste from washing people's feet. Interesting. So that's the going theory for the Zafacón, right? Yeah. And that's not an English word that they're saying. They're saying a very old Spanish word. maones for jeans, which the word for jeans is jeans.
That's interesting.
So yeah, it's this combination of kind of a funny Spanish with, of course, to them it's not funny. It's just a dialect, right? So you'll have funny Spanish with English mixed in, and you got that famous accent, right? So R's turn into L's at the end of a syllable. I say Puerto Rico, right? Instead of Puerto Rico.
Puerto. So the R is deeper?
The R it's like an L. So all of your verbs, comer, beber, vivir, right? Comer, vivir, vivir.
Interesting.
So that's informal Puerto Rican Spanish, right? So if people want to sound more formal, if they want to be more standard, whatever that means, they'll try to avoid that, just like me trying to avoid saying something in my Southern accent, right? Because it may have, in some spaces, it may have a negative association, but it does contribute to, okay, maybe I need to listen to that sentence again as a student. Okay, I've got something else to learn, and that's really exciting.
It is very similar to how our dialect is in Quebec versus French spoken in France and even anywhere around European and in Europe as a whole. I think part of that is that we are so secluded. Quebec is so secluded compared to the rest, Europe. Like you have all these countries, even including countries like Congo that will speak French. Morocco, they're still far out but closer to each other in the way where they can keep the same dialect or the same way of pronouncing words. If you think about the colonization and what that happened. So it seems like Puerto Rico has some similarities with Quebec in the language area.
Right.
And how the pride too that they get out of the way they live and a lot of other areas, how they live their life, really.
Right. The University of Puerto Rico in Rio Piedras is the flagship for preserving Puerto Rican culture. They're very proud of that role. If you look at a political map, it's not that the island is divided into left-right, right? It's the political divide is between what should our relationship be to the United States, and it's been that way for 100 years.
Interesting. Okay.
Right. Well, it's been exactly this way for closer to, say, 60 or 70 years. So the status quo is, we typically call them a commonwealth, and then most Americans don't really think about what that means. In Spanish, they are officially called an Estado Libre Asociado, a free associated state. So are we free? Are we associated? What does that mean, right? So you'll have one party that says, we need to be the 51st state, right? Same tax rules, same criminal laws, same everything, right? That's one way to go. The status quo is this kind of mixture, right, of U.S. citizenship with other things that are marked by the official language is one of those big culture war things. What should be the official language in the state house, right? That kind of thing. So you've got those two options. You can be a state, you can be a commonwealth, or you can just be independent.
But don't you need to be financially independent too to be able to support that? Okay. Right. Which is why Quebec is still part of Canada in some ways, because the law never passed. And well, that's another story.
It's the same story. I would say most Puerto Ricans will say, I'm a proud Latin American. Okay, so you're going to be a Latin American country that's completely independent from the United States. No, I don't want that. Because what does that mean? Okay, Puerto Rico is if it were the 51st state, it would be the poorest state. It's always been that way under the U.S. So if you lose U.S. citizenship, you lose your passport. We're having a huge debate over immigration in this country. So you could be deported from the United States for the first time. Okay. On top of that, you would lose SNAP, the equivalent in Puerto Rico, what we used to call food stamps, right? So you would lose something that helps you feed your family. You would lose something that helps you to pay for housing. And it sounds like a terrible idea at that point. And so that's why 90% or more picks one of these two options of status quo or statehood. But the holdouts are in the university because this is where the dreamers go. And so the dreamers will say, other countries declared independence and they're okay. somehow, some way, they're not perfect places. We're not a perfect place, but we can pull this off because everybody else did in the former Spanish Empire. There will be people that have more of an economics background that say, if we did this, a key issue there is like food sovereignty. If we just grew our own food, that would be a huge economic change for us because they import all their food from the United States. And they export a lot to the United States and other countries. So food sovereignty, there are all kinds of economic and political issues. It's like, okay, well, if they're independent, the fear used to be allying with Russia. Then you've got another Cuba on your hands, right? So some of the people at the university will be like, I want to be another Cuba. Cuba's great. Castro did the impossible. He got the United States out. Well, Castro did other things that not everyone is on board with. I think that that's one reason that independence is not popular in Puerto Rico. And it's also why it's confined largely to academic spaces and to activist spaces, because the role of the professor is to share ideas, to publish ideas, not necessarily to carry out the implications of those ideas. And if you are a business person, if you have a family that you're concerned about, maybe you're going to be more risk averse than if you're talking about an idea. You're talking about your child, or you're talking about the food you put on your own table, and that's not been demonstrably. Most people aren't ready to take that risk, but since they can preserve their culture, and if, like, we just had Puerto Rican Day parade in New York. If you can share your flag, if you can speak your language, if you can share your music, that's one reason that cultural nationalism is still alive and well, whereas the political side is a more complicated puzzle.
That is interesting. And like you said, you're not trying to push ideas on people, but rather getting educated on the topic so then you can make a more educated decision. Like you can make the decision that is best for what you think is ideal for society, but also for yourself. And speaking of cultural differences, I'd like to know, I'm still learning about Brazil's history with race. Could you help me understand how Black women have shaped Brazilian culture? Because that's something I think that is a big topic that you have written about. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Brazil is the largest slave-based society, or historically was the largest slave-based society in the history of humanity. When we talk about modern-day slavery, we talk about racialized slavery, which effectively began with the Portuguese colonizing Africa and changing the status of the captives that they brought back from sub-Saharan Africa. Brazil was so dependent on enslaved Africans because you just do the math. Portugal was a tiny little country. Even if they just sent all of their prisoners and anybody that they could make up an excuse to send to work in Brazil, the population simply would not be enough to create the workforce that they felt they needed at the time. Why did they need such a huge workforce? The reason Brazil is called Brazil is because the Portuguese got there and they asked themselves, great, what can we do with this? And they found trees that they could use to make dye, to dye cloth red. That's Brazil wood. So they took all of that they could, and then they kind of sat on it for the better part of a century and said, well, the Pope gave us this land. How can we get any money out of this? You know, if we're having some empathy for people, they had poor people in Portugal at the time. You had lots of second sons that were never going to inherit the farm or the property or rise up in the social sphere and in the political sphere. And the way to do that was to go to the New World and make money and then come back richer than you left. The way that they found to come back richer than they left was sugar. They figured out, the Portuguese did, in São Tomé e Príncipe, which is now an African nation, that you could grow lots and lots of sugar as a single monocrop, as opposed to a bunch of little things like a garden to feed yourself, right? So they learned to make these massive fields of cane, which we now associate with modern agriculture, but they needed a huge workforce to cut down all that cane and maintain it. So that's why there were so many Black people in Brazil from the start along the coast. Okay, the second thing is that Brazil is where the Americas saw their first gold rush. There's a state called Minas Gerais, and the Minas are the mines. And they found, you'll see cities with names like Diamantina, the diamond place, right? So to this day, Minas is a great source of mineral wealth. And so they brought many enslaved Africans to pull all that wealth out of the ground. I've learned recently that African peoples, in many cases, had an understanding of mining that the Portuguese didn't. So one of those historical ironies is that you learn from the Africans how to make mines so that you can enslave Africans to put them to work there. Another irony is that this is a place, Minas Gerais, particularly Ouro Preto, which I got to visit, is this huge, gorgeous colonial town. It's one of the best preserved examples of Baroque architecture in the world. It's a boom town. So you have lots of money happening very, very quickly. You have lots and lots of, for lack of a better term, of illegitimate babies. Why? Because you have white guys who have carte blanche with any woman who is not white, almost. I may be exaggerating to an extent. I mean, they might get some kind of dirty looks. Maybe they'll have to repent at church. Guys could do pretty much anything they wanted to definitely with enslaved women, but with most women of color. And so you have a large mixed race population. And in the city, if you were lucky enough to just be born into this world with a white father who is a landowner, who had all these other benefits, or you were what they called a concubine at the time, if you were a free woman of color who negotiated the system less to your own benefit, but more to your children's benefit, then you could actually rise up in society and have material benefits and legal benefits that you wouldn't see in the United States at the time. So where do Black women fit into all of this? There were women who were cutting cane. Yes, there were women who were working in the mines, but typically they would gravitate towards men because that was the goal, was to get the largest, strongest man to go and work in the mine. And sadly, until they were worked to death. I mean, there was very, very, very short life expectancy working in mines with no modern protections. Women were often domestic workers as well, enslaved domestic workers. And to this day, many Black women are going to be what they call an empregada. They're going to work as maids, and they're going to work in the home as a more modern version of this legacy of women being in the house in servile roles, being in the house and vulnerable to unwanted advances, many of which resulted in mixed race children.
Okay, I have a question, and
Yes.
that might be a really off question. Maybe it relates, maybe not. All I can think is the Pocahontas. Like, is my Disney, what do you say, metaphor relevant here or not at all? Where it's kind of like Smith was the white male that comes on territories where Pocahontas, I mean, the movie, like people know it, come to take over the land. And the story behind the story, the Disney story, is actually what you're just talking about. Is this? Today's episode is brought to you by Birmingham Breadworks. They've been serving up amazing sourdough bread, European-style pastries, pizzas, soups, sandwiches, all made from scratch since 2014. Everything they make is fresh. No preservatives, no additives. Just simple, clean ingredients. Their cafe is the perfect cozy spot with natural lighting, warm wooden tones, and art from local students and photographers. It's perfect to grab a coffee or something delicious to eat. Plus, they're big on sustainability as a gold level member of the EAT, Earth Aware team. Stop by Birmingham Breadworks and taste the difference of fresh local food.
There
The
are
same
parallels.
story, is it
There are parallels.
inspired by?
Yes,
Yeah.
Brazil's version of Pocahontas, or the equivalent of Pocahontas, is called Iracema, which is this very romanticized, okay, here comes
Yeah.
the colonizer, and he's just smitten by this warrior goddess of a different race. and then they have their child together, and then he goes back to Portugal and she dies. So it's 19th century. Everything's kind of sad at some point. There are parallels there because these were women, many of them faced different options than men because of the history I just described. There were women who ran away and who lived in what they called quilombos. A quilombo is something that emerges in a space where you don't have any abolitionists around you. Most Americans think of escaping slavery as Frederick Douglass's story, or of Sojourner, well, not just Sojourner Truth, but of Harriet Tubman, the Underground Railroad, where the journey is north, because in the north, no matter how many problems there are in your life, you won't be a slave, right? What happens if there's no place to run like that? In the case of Brazil, they would run to wherever they could get away. And in many cases, people would form communities, and in some cases even live in African-based societies. And the most famous one of those is in Palmares. It was led by a slave rebel named Zumbi, who ruled as an African king over this gigantic swath of land. It was about the size of Rhode Island, something like that. And so first, I want to say that yes, there were female maroons. However, women were pressured due to their context to take different avenues. So if you're working in the house, you're under more constant surveillance. So you're going to be watched more often. And secondly, you have a child in many cases, because we talk about birth control and women's right to control their own bodies today. There was no debate over that. If your body could produce a child, it's very likely that you soon would in this society. So most women, if you look at the historical documentation, are most concerned about what's going to happen to my children. And so when you're put into that position, you negotiate with an unjust system. And so it might mean doing whatever pleases your enslaver so that you can get manumitted, right? Manumission is just being liberated from slavery. You get
and your enslaver in the sense of your husband? Is that what?
Well, in the sense of yes. Well, I mean, he wouldn't be your husband because you're not married to.
Oh, okay.
You're stuck in this role of lover, concubine.
Yeah, lover.
That illegitimate relationship. So you would negotiate with him so that either you could be manumitted and have more rights. You're still a black woman in a racist society. So you would have the right to, open up a food stand, right? To this day in Bahia, which is has the largest concentration of black people because of this history of sugar, you'll still see women selling a food called acarajé in the street. There were women selling acarajé, some of whom were still enslaved, and they were trying to earn their freedom in many cases. And other women were free women of color. And so you would do that so that you have more opportunities, primarily so that your child has better opportunities. Yeah. You could buy your child's freedom. You could have the father of the child recognize him with his name or be his godfather in a context. Everybody's Catholic. It's a way of establishing social networks and benefits. Maybe he'll get to go to school, right? And learn a trade, right? Mm-hmm. The vast majority of enslaved people couldn't read. They weren't allowed to. But if they could learn a trade, like they could make something to sell at the market, that's a better life than being an enslaved person on the plantation. So this is the historical backdrop for the importance of black women in Brazilian society. This barrier to the written language, which today is continued as less access to education or to quality education, primarily through college, right? I'm not saying there are not college-educated black women, there are, but it's going to create a situation where people rely on oral traditions to inform their poetry, but to inform their religion and their life. So Brazil is the world's largest Catholic country. with the caveat that many people are Catholic plus, as they say in Orange is the New Black. So you'll be Catholic, but you are negotiating, right? Pocahontas may have had her own language. She probably had her own religion before the Christianizers came. Well, in the case of the African people, what they would do is they would follow orders while the priest or their enslaver or whoever is in charge of them were around. And so when there are feast days, like saint days, they will celebrate said saint. But in order to preserve their African beliefs, their African visions of the world, they would say, okay, well, we're looking at Saint whoever it might be. In the Spanish-speaking world, it would be Santa Barbara. It's one of the famous ones. In the Portuguese-speaking world, it would be Nossa Senhora da Conceição, right? We're looking at an apparition of the Virgin Mary, but it really represents an African goddess. It really represents the sea or a river, right? And so a whole religion evolved primarily from Yoruba peoples, with influences from what was called Dahomey at the time. And they preserved these faiths as what's now called candomblé, which tends to, in many cases, reject the association with Catholicism. You've got Umbanda, which is still very much associated with Catholicism. And so you'll see a lot of people that will go to church on Sunday, go to Catholic Mass. They will also attend a service at a centro espírita, a spiritual center, or a terreiro, which would be an African-based spiritual center, so that they could preserve that African heritage, in many cases even among white people, because the faith spread throughout the community. And so this is another example of how these oral traditions, along with the history of slavery, yes, along with a history of resistance to slavery, have informed African women's experience in Brazil, but their influence is gigantic. There are linguists that say that the Portuguese language spread throughout Brazil because of enslaved people learning the language, right? So if you look at the percentage of the population that is of African descent, there are people that say maybe half of the country has African descent. If you look at that history of enslavement and how you're treated better if you speak Portuguese, because this is not a great learning environment, right? Yeah. If you couldn't speak Portuguese, they would call you boçal, which is the idiot, right? Because you can't communicate with people and you're only good for grunt work, right? But if you can speak, you can be used in a different way on the plantation. You have better chances at freedom, better chances for a better future for yourself and for your family. And so it's no surprise that African people and mixed race people learned the Portuguese language and spread it throughout what was then the empire. And think of the importance of mothers and maternal figures. You had Black women in the 19th century, I know, and surely before that would be wet nurses.
That would be what?
Wet nurses. So these are the women that would nurse, that would give breast milk to the children, because it was considered improper for the white women to do that. And so these are literally the bodies that fed everybody in Brazil. And in other contexts, it would be indigenous women that did similar things. But they literally raised the children. They were in charge of helping them to learn language, because they were charged with making sure the child is cared for. And so these are, in many ways, the mothers of the nation. And that's not to in any way insult white women or the women who, through chance, were born into a higher rank.
Because you don't decide that.
Yeah.
It's really a chance.
Right. And this is the patriarchal society that people were born into. But it does shed a light on a very underappreciated population definitely until the last 70 years, and more so in the last 20 years. I say the last 70 years because that's taking into account the gigantic impact of one author, one of the most well-known one of the best sellers of Brazilian literature that's only recently been seen as Brazilian literature is the account of a Black woman who lived in a favela, who lived in a slum, and who made her living picking up trash. She picked up paper to recycle it, and her name was Carolina Maria de Jesus. And I would say, if not all Black writers today, all Black female writers say, I was influenced by this woman who, despite all of these barriers that she faced and the very, very difficult life she had. This is a woman who had a second grade education, was able to publish her diary, who saw herself as an author, who no matter what she faced, she still said, I'm going to be a writer, even if it means picking up the paper out of the trash and writing my stories on it and sending it off to be published, because that's the life that she lived. And many of these writers today will look back at a person like that and say, if she can do it, I can.
That's motivation right there. Okay, I have one more question on that topic. And I'd like to know, when we talk about that slavery, has it evolved into a modern type of slavery, or has it gone away completely in today's age?
Many people will tell you that it's gone away in today's age. Brazil has always been concerned about how it's seen by other countries. And that has to do with the history of colonialism. If all the money's in Europe, you want to look good for Europe. If all the money's in the United States, you want to look good for them as well. So Brazil was the last country to abolish slavery in the New World, right? So they made it to 1888. So they were just 20 years or so. No, they were doing the math. It's 12 years from entering the 20th century with slaves and a king, right? So again, we're talking about spaces where you're trying to negotiate in a space where all the other countries have done something and they expect you to do something as well. In this case, the great abolitionists that were putting pressure on Brazil were not the United States, it was England. And they have an expression, para inglês ver. You make up the house so that your neighbors don't come over and see a dirty house. In the same way, when you've got a slave plantation, you make sure that everybody has nice clothes, they're well kept, and if interviewed, they say, how are you being, the outsiders say, how are you being treated? Wonderfully. Well,
it's all scripted.
It's all scripted.
It's
Right.
like,
right.
that's not the day-to-day, the way they experience it. That's just the face they're putting out in the world.
So that's the facade.
The facade.
For the abolitionists. And so this myth emerged of a gentler slavery. And the icon of promoting this way of thinking is a man named Gilberto Freire. And he wrote a book called The Masters and the Slaves. And it has ramifications for all of Latin America, because it creates the myth of a slave plantation as a family, the myth of a slavery that just wasn't as bad as other kinds of slavery. Well, then you'd ask yourself, well, where's the bad slavery in this equation? The bad slavery is in the United States. We had a civil war. We had all kinds of documentation, largely from the abolitionists, of how badly enslaved people were treated in this country. In the case of Brazil, they would say, well, look, we have all these mixed race people in our country. Surely that means that since everybody has a little bit of Black ancestry, that you can't hate yourself. You can't be racist if you're part Black. That convinces some people in Brazil to this day. And you'll hear people say that we're a racial democracy. The opposite of a racial democracy is a racial dictatorship, which would be the Jim Crow South and later on the Nazis. Well, you can still be racist and not be as bad as the Nazis. However, we measure these things, right? But that'll be a way of dismissing people's arguments, saying, you know, why aren't there more Black professors? Why aren't there more Black politicians? Why is it that people who are mixed race will tend to say, oh, I'm not black, I'm mixed? When in the United States, many of these people would identify as black. This created what they call a mestizo myth or mestizo myth, where everybody's supposed to be mixed up, even when they're not, even when most people in the upper middle class to the rich people, everybody's white. If you're in a space like Bahia, where the population, again, is vast majority is black people, and then you would have maybe a mixed race person who is upper middle class. That mixed race person, in many cases, will, because of their environment, they'll say, "Oh, I'm not black." They'll even say they're white in some cases, and definitely in the past they would, because it's a way of denying being associated with those below you on the social scale. So we talked today about the myth of racial democracy. Many people to this day say that it exists, that there's no racism in Brazil. You hear something similar in Puerto Rico and throughout the Caribbean. There's no racism here. Castro said he fixed racism in 1962. It took him, like the revolution's 59, it took him less than 3 years to fix racism. Well, that's quite an accomplishment there. Regardless of your ideology, right, whether it's a country where you're a dictatorship, who's a military dictatorship, whether it's a communist dictatorship, whether it's an actual political democracy, people tend to deny racism by saying that racism is something that is a United States problem or a South Africa problem. We don't have that problem because our slavery was better or not as bad. That's typically how they say it. Our slavery was not as bad.
That's their perception from out there.
Yes,
okay.
It's a common perception. And because everyone is related to a black person somehow, then surely we can't be racist. I can't be racist against myself. The reality is, if you view yourself as superior to others, that's typically going to be associated with your skin color, even if you're not conscious of that fact. And we hear about colorblind racism in the United States. We'll have people who think that black people are dangerous. They don't want to live next to black people. In their mind, they're not being racist. They're just being safe, right?
Okay, so, I said that was my last question on the topic, but I actually have a follow-up to that because they're going into the topic. When you talk about color blindness, you know, if I think of a child, the child doesn't see the color. Mm-hmm. They're just learning about the world. They're innocent in many ways about just the people, about the danger. Do you think it's something that is picked up on people, adults that surround themselves, that then they become having clear positioning on topics such as race? Or is it related to the experience they go through themselves? I'm curious, what do you think affect that shift? Because it doesn't happen, I don't think you're born with it. You know, that's where I'm going with it. I don't think you're born with it. So somehow you develop a sense for having an opinion on a topic, whether it's good or bad. Mm-hmm. What have you seen, or what's your thought on that?
I think that we are born into an unjust world. Mm-hmm. And so even if we're not overtly saying or doing racist things, I think that when people say, I'm not racist, in some cases they think, I've never yelled a bad word at somebody. I've never denied somebody a job because of their race, that kind of thing. But even if you're not aware of the consequences of your actions on other people, you can still hurt people. Just like a little kid can accidentally hurt somebody when they're playing sports. And I think that raises a similar question. You need to ask the person that got hurt, as well as the person who accidentally hurt that person, even if they weren't aware of their actions. So I think that we can't forget people's inherent value as humans, and that believing in a shared humanity, which could be interpreted as a kind of color blindness, is something that the world needs more of. I think that if you hear in the news that empathy is weakness or compassion is weakness, you're going in the wrong direction as a society. But I think that a child is born into that unjust world and needs to be educated as to the history of why do we live in this neighborhood and not this other one? Why do you go to this school but not this other one? Or what's the value in the fact that your school has people from different backgrounds in it, different cultures, different languages that are associated, yes, with people who look differently. And to view that diversity as a positive thing, I think that has to be an active process because the child is innocent, but the child is born into this unjust world. Someone's going to tell them or do something around them that's going to teach them that their body determines where they're going to fit in society, whether that means as a boy or a girl or another gender, right? Or as a black or a white person. What does it mean to be neither of those in a system that was initially made for those two options, right? And I think that educating people to be aware of cultural and racial differences is very important because you can be colorblind, yes, but take actions that are still harmful to other groups, and then without realizing it, you've continued the cycle of an unjust world. We can't fix everything, but we can make things better.
Now, let's do a fun game that I call Truth, Dare, or Debunk. For each round, you'll either choose a truth where you share a surprising cultural fact, a dare, like teaching us a phrase in your favorite language, or a debunk where you clarify a common stereotype about your culture. You're Native American, but obviously you're well-versed in many other cultures. So if you want to add from other languages, other cultures or perspectives, you are more than welcome to do that. Which one should we start with? Truth, dare, or debunk?
Let's start with debunk.
Debunk. So debunking a myth about your culture. What would it be?
I would say that I, as a college professor, I just want to say that there's a myth right now that college is just a place where you go to get your job skills, where you learn how to make money, and then you go out in the world and make money. And I just wanted to remind everybody that life's more than that. And I think that students know that. I respect that we all have bills to pay, and I know that we live in a country that has a lot of student debt. I respect all of these things. I want everybody to be able to pay their bills. But I think that college is also a place to grow into adulthood. Of course, you're an adult when you start, but I think that you're at a place in life that is really unique. And I encourage students to get to travel because this is the point in your life where it's going to be easiest to travel. I hope you find someone you love. I hope you find a great job as a student and that you're very happy. But when you have these things in your life, you have to think about more than yourself. If you're a young person who is in college or who just got out of college, it's just you, and you are discovering the world, and you're discovering new things for the first time. Take a gap year, go abroad, learn another language, meet people that you never would have met otherwise, because it's not your last chance to do it, but it's a great chance to do it. And after that, yes, become a doctor, become a lawyer, become something that makes you happy and pays the bills. But take time for yourself and view education as a chance to grow into a more complex version of yourself. And I think in some ways a more beautiful version of yourself, because you will change through travel and through meeting new people through culture and language.
That is well said. Should we do a dare?
Sure.
Could you teach us a phrase in your native language or any language that you like?
I'm pretty sure that everybody listening is going to speak pretty good English.
That's right.
And one of my favorites in English is cricketer in the dog's hind leg.
Oh, okay, that's an expression. Say that one more time.
See, I'm switching codes. All right, so we got cricketer, then a dog's hind leg. you say that someone is a liar or is false, then you would say that person's crooked. You typically hear about crooked politicians, right? Or maybe a crooked lawyer that is kind of creative with the rules, right? So that person's crooked, right? But where I come from in South Georgia, you'd say that person's crookeder than a dog's hind leg, because it's not like a person's leg that's nice and straight. You get that little bend back there.
Okay, so if I try to say it, you said it very fast. I don't know that I picked up on it. If you say it slow, or I'm going to try to repeat it.
Sure. Crookeder
Crookeder
than a dog's
hind leg.
Right. So it's hind in its hindquarters, like behind, right?
Yeah.
Leg.
Okay. Nice. Okay, how about the truth now?
Sure.
What is a surprising cultural fact that people should know about that is actually true?
That is actually true.
So something that people think is true, and it's true. So you want to reinforce it.
You've got to read a lot in college. And I have a lot of students that are shocked because I teach classes that are in English, but they're about culture. I've taught several Brazilian culture classes. I'm teaching an introduction to world cultures in the fall, and students will be shocked. And I don't know if they're just trying to play the system or if they're just being honest, but I'll get comments at the end of the semester, and they'll say, there is so much reading in this class. So I'll cut the readings in half next semester. There's so much reading in this class. So why are students having that reaction? I think part of it's generational. I was born in 1981, whatever that makes me. We have millennials, we have Gen X, we have all this and that, we have all these labels. But I remember a time before smartphones, and so I've always loved the library. To this day, I think that the library it's a safe place for kids to just go explore whatever is interesting to them and to entertain themselves, right? But I think that smartphones, as a society, I'm addicted. I'm not going to judge anybody, but I think that smartphones have caused us to read constantly in small chunks.
Yeah.
And I think that especially as students come in at 18 and most of their social interaction either has been on their cell phones in written language, or otherwise they're consuming media that is taking a TikTok or whatever, we're becoming more impatient as a society because we're used to pressing a button and getting what we want, even if that's an image or a word, right? And so if you have to sit down with a novel and just dive into that novel and just sit with it, not every student has had that experience, or not every student has done that for fun. And I think that reading is something that more and more students view as something that you do for work instead of for pleasure. And so as a literature scholar, a person who loves books so much that he writes books about books.
Yes, that's literally.
It just goes on forever.
Yeah.
That's something that I'm still figuring out how to reach the students and say, there is a value in being immersed in information. Even if you're not reading literature, maybe you're not into fiction, okay, immersed in history, immersed in society, immersed in theories of whatever you want to study, immersed in science, get immersed in that, please. So I think that the habit of constantly reading, and then if you go to graduate school, you read and eat and sleep. Finding a passion that can keep you engaged even when, okay, I've gone through quite a few pages here, is part of what college is for, is finding what you love and being immersed in it through language. And reading's the cornerstone, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you have to go through it. What about audio listening for the books? Is this something that is possible and welcome? Maybe there's some limitations, but you saying that made me realize how much I used to read books, like big books, and especially starting in high school during that time. And then the more time went by, the more I diminished the amount of reading. Not that I didn't like, because I used to love reading, and I was like a big writer in French, because that's just the equivalent of your English, right? Now I'm really much so all about audiobooks, because I can multitask. I can be at the gym, I can be cooking, I can be relaxing, doing something else, and also listening. So what kind of options do students have? Maybe it hasn't reached that point yet, but I'm just curious if that's something.
I think that's an opportunity for teachers to be creative and to make the class more relevant. I've taught classes where the final project was a podcast. Where I've collaborated with Dr. John Moore's class, where we got to meet people from the local NPR station. And you know, they gave the students a workshop on how to make a podcast. I had the students make iMovies. I'm sure that Android will come out with whatever they call those movies, but you take a classic idea, which is you learn a language through a skit. You have all the fun, and the kids get the students get in touch with their inner children, right? You get to play at school maybe one last time before you go off to be an oncologist or something that's very serious business. And you get to film it, and some of the students are very well informed with technology, and so you can have special effects, you can edit it. They discover literature in a different way because of these skits. As for the role of audiovisual media in learning, I think it's a fantastic resource for language learning, without a doubt, because my argument for literature was, well, you won't always have a Mexican friend to bother to speak Spanish with, right? At some point, they want to be left alone, right? Or you won't always have a Brazilian to talk to. So the book is there to keep your Spanish or Portuguese up when people are not around. Well, we live in a world where you can see just about anything on the planet in your cell phone. And the benefit to that is you can actually hear the language a lot more, which is going to help you to understand people when they talk, understand native speakers. Your vocabulary will grow so that people will speak faster around you. That's always the complaint when you start out. It's, oh gosh, they talk so fast. Is that audiovisual will allow you to slow it down. Like most YouTube videos, you put it on 3/4 so it doesn't sound like they're underwater. And you can pick up a lot of language that way. So I think that digital media is really the place where most things that involve language will go in the future more and more. And I think that there's a great opportunity there, so long as we kind of temper it with being able to consume a long text and the patience that comes with that. But I think that YouTube is fantastic, and the more the area grows, we're just going to have better and better resources for learning languages.
Let's do two more. Truth, dare, or debunk. I'll let you pick one. I'll pick the second.
Dare.
Dare.
Okay.
Dare to teach a phrase or an expression in your native or favorite language.
What is the color of a burro that runs away?
Oh, that's a joke. What is the color?
Cor de burro quando foge. It's that color between brown and gray.
Huh.
That exists in Portuguese.
Oh, nice.
A cor de burro quando foge.
That's the name of the color?
That's the name of the color.
Oh my goodness, this is a long word. It sounds like a sentence. Wow. That's an interesting fact right there. Now I need to try to pronounce it. That's a hard one.
A cor.
Cor.
Okay, so the color. A cor de burro.
De burro.
So burro is the burro.
Okay.
Right? Quando foge.
Quando foge.
When he runs away.
When he runs away. Okay, so that was a sentence. Well, yeah, but that's what is the color.
That's the color.
Even though the first part you said the color, so that was like a sentence you were making, correct?
Well, that's
how you say it?
Yeah, I mean, like if you did a little sentence diagram, like it's just the color, and then all these other words are describing the color. So that's the phrase. Like everything would be called an adjectival, right? It's describing that one word.
That is so cool.
Yeah,
Nice.
if you don't trust somebody, eu fico com o pé atrás. I've got 1 foot behind me in case I need to run away. Right?
You're like on the defense a
Right.
little bit. Debunk.
Okay.
What is a stereotype you'd like to debunk about your culture?
Okay. About my culture, I'm speaking as a college professor because that's been a huge influence in my life. I think that politics is politics, and I know that people have got to get elected. I respect that. I think that we're in a context, in a world that is what I would call no holds barred. So anything that gets people upset at the other side and or somehow benefits you, people will say or do it. And that's politics, and that the media is part of that. But I think that a message that students have gotten, whether it's from the media, whether it's from concerned parents that are very just looking out for their kids' welfare, is that if you go to college, we're there to brainwash you. You'll hear the word indoctrinate a lot now. And I've never indoctrinated anybody in anything, right? The fear is that we're going to make you a communist, which is not anyone's goal. Even if that person is communist, I don't think that they have that much control over the student.
Yeah.
I think the student knows who they are. That's not my goal. Or that we're going to, like, you'll hear spurious things that the teacher is going to make you gay or trans. Like everybody's talking about trans people. There's a lot of transphobia in the world. I can't make you be anything that you don't want to be. I can respect you. I can let you express yourself. I can let you be whoever you want to in my classroom. But I think that these are two examples of education being politicized because everything is politicized. I always tell my students that there was a time when a chicken sandwich was not a political issue. There were no conservative or liberal tennis shoes. There were just shoes, right? We live in a world of symbols, right? And that's the genius of so many political thinkers in these, whether they're politicians or if they're in think tanks or whatever, is they found a way to make every symbol possible political. And I make my living off of symbols, right? Of conveying words to students, conveying language, culture, literature, yes. So the arts, all of these things. So I think that there is a myth that I'm trying to make students conform to some kind of political party or ideology. I want there to be better informed liberals and conservatives and people who think up other parties and other ways of being in a community that we haven't even thought of yet. And I want to encourage students to explore their independent thought about these issues. And that doesn't mean copying and pasting what I think. That means coming up with their own idea. And that is scary sometimes because copying and pasting the right answer has all too often been what students think school is for. And it's much bigger than that. It's about becoming who you want to be.
You don't want to fall in conformity.
It should be an anti-conformist enterprise, yes.
That's a great message. Thanks for playing along. This was our Truth Dare and Debunk segment. Now let's go back to the conversation. So diaspora means people who've left their homeland, either by force or voluntarily, and keep ties to their culture. When these authors write about migration, the authors that you study, do they see it more as a loss, a new beginning, or something in between?
I would say that the experience of the African diaspora is different from people who migrate for economic reasons in one key fact. It's the fact that enslaved Africans were taken as captives. So even if you leave Central America in today's context because you feel unsafe in El Salvador, because there are gangs. On some level, you are making the choice to leave, versus the history of the African continent of sub-Saharan Africa, which was radically altered by European enslavers. So the Portuguese, and then very soon after, the Portuguese were kind of the people that supplied the rest of the Iberian empires, including Spain. And Cuba does not get a pass on this. They abolished slavery only shortly before Brazil did. But the fact that entire societies were changed by African enslavement. So you've got the Europeans on the coast who are buying captives. And so you would have hunters, African hunters in the hinterlands going to find more and more people to sell to these guys on the coast. This is in no way to blame slavery on African peoples, but it's to show how the arrival of this very small population of white people, of European people, who figured out how to manipulate local politics, led to the world that we live in today. They figured out they could manipulate warring tribes, and whoever is losing the battle is shipped out. That changed the way that the African diaspora is remembered by those who, for decades, in most cases centuries, have not been enslaved. So there are still people in Brazil whose great-grandmothers were enslaved as children because of the late abolition. So I think that a key difference between the African diaspora and, say, the Cuban diaspora. The Cuban diaspora, for many years, you had the golden generation. Like, the first people that left are the people that don't benefit from communism. So you've got rich people that leave the island so they could continue their businesses here, and most of those people were white. Then you got the children who came over with Pedro Pan. So these are people that have a lot of privilege, and there's no reason to hold that against them, but their experience was very different from the slavery experience. And so that's remembered with a lot of pain. One of the emotions that I write about in my forthcoming book is called banzu. Right? I think in English it'd be banzu, right? The pronunciation, which is what poet Conceição Evaristo calls the unique depression or melancholy that Black people feel because of this history of slavery and racism. It's debatable what the parameters are for that. I mean, is this just part of the human experience that's been shaped by this history? Is it something that is an emotion that is unique to an ethnicity? These are things that I'm still hashing out in my book. But that is something that is related to the unique experience of Black peoples in the Americas, is this notion of a diaspora that is rooted in slavery, in my estimation. Because in my estimation, historically, before slavery, through all of these different nations, tribes, groups, languages, religions together, and created this community or this identity, which was Black, there was no Black community in Africa. It would be like saying there was a white community in Europe. No, there was, before there was France and Germany, there were all of these different principalities, right? People organized themselves in different ways. For me, the diaspora begins with enslavement. Other people will take a more Afrocentric route, and they'll say, well, I don't want to be defined by slavery. My people were the Ashantis that were never that fought off slavery for as long as possible, or my people were this pre-slavery African society, and that's their right to relate to history in that way. But for me, enslavement, the Middle Passage, is something that is definitive for the African diaspora. That is related to in Brazil because you've got a lot of writers that feel like they're creating something out of nothing or out of near nothing because they went through a traditional school, maybe even a traditional college literature program, and everybody was that they read was white. Or if they were mixed race people, they would be people that who their blackness was very, very downplayed. The most famous writer in Brazil is a man named Joaquim Maria Machado de Assis. And throughout most of the 20th century, people just presumed he was white because he was a writer. He spoke fluent French in addition to Portuguese, and he learned several other languages. And so people were just taught to associate brilliance with being white. Recently, in the last 25 years or so, it's been rediscovered that he was called mulatto in his context. That's a hurtful word now. Most people who are mixed race will prefer pardo, brown. But in his case, that's what he was called. And so that's an example of why Black authors in general, but Black women in particular, will look back on what's called literature and say, there's nobody here that looks like me or that has an experience like mine. Conceição Evaristo has another term called escrevivência. It's a mixture of the word vivência, experience, and escrever, or escrito, which is to write, writing my experience, which is different from what we call the canon, from literature, right? Yeah. The big names in literature. And so when women are told that people like them don't write, then they have to create a relationship with the past, and they have to create a relationship with writing that is different from a white author of more privilege. And so they will relate to their ancestors as a diaspora population in a way that is in many ways unique. It's going to draw on family in many cases, as opposed to necessarily dialoguing with a famous writer, although some of them will rewrite a lot of famous books. It's going to be stories that they heard of migrating inside Brazil. You've got the northeast of Brazil, which is largely Black along the coast. And sadly, the whole region has suffered a lot of poverty. In the hinterlands, it's going to be drought, right? You've got what they call the sertão, like a drier region. And sometimes it'll be good to raise crops in. Sometimes it'll be good to raise cattle in. And then the drought comes and you have to feed yourself. And so the solution historically has been to go to the southeast. That's where Rio is, and that's where Sao Paulo is. And so you got Sao Paulo, which is one of these megalopolises that's it's one of the largest cities in the world. And so you'll have all of these people who are treated like bumpkins, right? Because they grew up in the country. They didn't grow up with modern conveniences. And that was more prominent throughout the 20th century. But a lot of Afro-Brazilians had that experience of internal migration as well, of sometimes migrating to white spaces, or you'll see, especially in school, you'll hear about people saying, I was the only Black kid in my class. And so that's an internal diaspora or an internal migration that some people have experienced. Conceição Evaristo is from Minas, which is at the center of the country. She was very poor. She grew up in a favela. She moved to Rio and eventually earned a PhD in comparative literature. She's a recently celebrated example of a great writer and people who've overcome all kinds of barriers. But she's very quick to point out, why did it take you so long to recognize me? And I think every artist who thinks that they've done something important, she's done important things, may say, well, I knew I was great before everybody else did. It's not that. she's pointing out, why is it that I'm almost 80 and I'm being recognized as an author? Why did it take me so long to get through school, to get through, to start sending out my manuscripts, to finally get a publisher, to jump through all of these hoops? If I were a white author, especially a white author with money, I would have done this decades before. And so she's using this platform as a very thought-provoking space to make us think critically about race and literature. She literally ran for the Academia Brasileira de Letras to be selected by this group of great authors in Brazil. It's modeled on French examples of the great minds, right? And in order to be tapped to join this select group, you have to be a great author, but you also have to be accepted by the other great authors. And she was rejected. And especially the Black community was in an uproar, because this is like turning down Toni Morrison. I mean, she's got this mural in Rio, in Rio de Janeiro. There's this giant mural on the side of a building because people know her work, they love it, and it's sophisticated. Why wasn't she picked? And so that's an example of being a diasporic writer, a lot of the struggles that Black writers go through to this day.
And I'm not very familiar with the process of that, of being accepted in that circle and how that works. Is there, on top of that, any sort of luck that might make it where, okay, like there's an open space now because that person dropped down? What would you say about that?
They're members for life. So,
okay.
So sadly,
so that's not an option.
Sadly, if someone dies, then a space opens up.
Okay.
But right now, a similar debate is going on with the author I wrote my first book about. Her name is Ana Maria Gonçalves. And she wrote, it feels sometimes like Ana Maria is trying to say everything that Black women couldn't say before her all in one novel. The novel is almost 1,000 pages long. And it's the 19th century, and it's an enslaved woman named Luisa Mahin, or Mahin, I think it'd be in Portuguese pronunciation. And she is historical in the sense that a person who really lived, Luis Gama, he was a famous abolitionist. Think of a Frederick Douglass, right? He was an abolitionist lawyer, and he wrote his biography in a letter to a guy named Luis Mendonça. And he mentions in 7 lines of text that his mother was a slave rebel, and that she had participated in a revolt. And in the novel, that revolt is a historical revolt in which a bunch of Muslim Africans in Bahia, in the place where at the time most people were enslaved Africans, to this day most people are Black, the goal seemed to be to overthrow the government and to establish a caliphate, to make it like a Middle Eastern country in the middle of Catholic Empire, in the middle of the Americas. To tell the story of such a fascinating woman, she takes 1,000 pages to tell the story of her life before she was enslaved. So you learn about the African continent, have a representation of the Middle Passage. You have a representation of what it was like to be a mother who is enslaved, who loses her child, because historically Luis was sold into slavery by his own father and was shipped out and found his way to Sao Paulo, right? And the story of the novel is Luisa, his mother, traveling Brazil in search of her lost son. Sadly, she gives up hope on finding him there and returns to the African continent. So because of this great novel, Ana Maria Gonçalves has been considered for a spot in the Academia Brasileira de Letras. We still don't know if she'll be selected, but that the shadow of what happened with Conceição continues to be there and to be a wound for many people, because that's the message is that if you're Black, you can't be a great author, and that's simply not true.
And you mentioned, I need to ask, you mentioned an author that I do not know, Frederick Douglass, I think is who you mentioned. So what's the similarity or?
So Frederick Douglass is probably the most read abolitionist writer of the 19th century today. He is a person who gives a narrative of the life. Is his book, in which he talks about what life was like on a plantation as an enslaved man. And eventually he escaped to the abolitionist North. The abolitionists already were gathering materials on what life was like for enslaved people because they wanted to prove to the government, to the world, that this was an intolerable institution. The most popular way of looking at slavery amongst white populations in the 19th century was called tolerationism. Tolerationism is having what today we would call the common sense of saying if you hit someone with a whip, it hurts, right? If you punish them by beating them, obviously this is bad. So people knew slavery was bad, but it was considered a necessary evil. There was even debate when America was founded if they should have slavery or not, because it obviously flies in the face of democratic country. Yeah. But people tolerated it as a necessary evil. And the best parallel I can establish for students today is look at how much blood has been shed over oil. We know that oil and things made of it lead to terrible things nowadays. But no one I know has come up with a great substitute to do away with it. So it just goes on and on. Slavery is obviously a different situation, but it was viewed in a parallel manner. Well, what people did in the South to try to shift the debate is to do something very similar to what they did in Brazil, which is to say the captive, we would say today, but the slave is part of the family. He's well treated, he's fed. Why would we break our machines? Why would we mistreat the slaves that feed us and get us money? Well, obviously, they were mistreating them. And the abolitionists of the North and the abolitionists of England wanted to show that to the rest of the world. And so they used the media, just like politicians use the media today, and different groups do as well. And so they have Frederick Douglass, who was the perfect source, the perfect voice of a man who lived under slavery. He tells his story under slavery of how terrible things were, and he went on a speaking tour. He was a celebrity of telling anyone who would be willing to listen to us, primarily in the North, that this institution is wrong and it has to end. Mm-hmm. And so I'm sure that his work had a huge impact in the United States. He's one of the most recognizable figures of the slave narrative, and he was even made ambassador to Haiti, because the United States has had this historical relationship with Haiti as a Black republic. This notion of a Black republic, even Abraham Lincoln considered sending the Black population there after the Civil War, because it had so much in common with our country. So Frederick Douglass is an internationally known abolitionist thinker, and Luis Gama is as well. Luis Gama was self-taught. He joined the police academy to gain an education, became a lawyer, and he liberated many enslaved people in Sao Paulo, which in the 19th century in Brazil is a huge impact.
Thanks for all that background and context.
Sure.
Looking at literature from Brazil, Colombia, and Puerto Rico, what differences stand out to you in how writers talk about races, class, or even gender? Mm-hmm.
I think that they're all peninsular. They all have a peninsular background because they were all peninsular colonies.
What does that mean?
Peninsular means like Iberian is the better word. That we talk about, like in France, we'll talk about the hexagon, right? So we talk about shapes, right? So I'll talk to a non-specialist about the hexagon, and he's like, "You mean France?" it's the same thing with Spain. We'll talk about the peninsula. We're talking about Spain if we're talking in Spanish, and Portugal, of course, is part of the Iberian Peninsula. So these are people that are deeply influenced by Portugal and Spain. So they have that in common. They're all Catholic nations that all have sizable evangelical Christians. That's been a huge impact from the United States in the last 30 to 40 years, making a lot of inroads there. Brazil is almost half evangelical Christian of some stripe, which is really important in the largest Catholic country in the world. But I think that they all have in common the shared history of what they believed or what they were told was a slavery that was not as bad as in the United States. And they were told that because they are mixed race and mixed cultures, that they live in harmony and that there's no tension there. One reason is because when nations decided to create an identity for themselves, they had to say what was unique about them. And in the Americas, the unique thing was all of these cultures that were in contact, right? And so you'll hear the word mestizo, because it just means mixed, right? So beyond biology of, okay, my dad looks this way, mom looks this way, or vice versa, it's a reference to cultural context of, okay, we eat food with ingredients from two different continents, right? We listen to music with an African drum or with a Spanish guitar. All of them share this background as Catholic nations, as Iberian nations, in two cases, Spanish-speaking nations. So, or Spanish-speaking spaces, depending on how you want to talk about Puerto Rico. It's always a unique place to talk about. So I would say that Colombia is, in my experience, the place that's most deeply Catholic. And so that conservatism in that country is deeply associated with the Catholic Church specifically. I think it has to do with being a place where the Inquisition was based, like they had a palace of the Inquisition there, but it's a deeply Catholic nation. It's a very conservative place, but you still got very radical thinkers like Manuel Zapata Oliveira. Manuel Zapata Oliveira is important to the African diaspora in general because he wrote a novel called Chango el Gran Putas, or in English, Colonizing the African Diaspora. And I see that smile because you're like, that's not what you said. Okay.
Yeah, I recognize the word in there.
Right. So in Chango el Gran Putas, a literal translation would be closer to Chango, the greatest devil, or the biggest devil, right? Because el putas, yes, it's a bad word because it means ladies of the night, among other translations, right?
You're good with words, you know that?
It is a way of talking about, like in English we say old scratch, right? Yeah. It'd be an old word for the devil, right? Well, Chango is the devil in the sense that he's been resisting the colonizer at every level, including religion, right? I talked before about how Africans had their own religions before they were enslaved. And so in this novel, you have African spirits that are controlling. They're pulling the strings of history, right? And they are supporting the African diaspora from slavery through national liberation, through emancipation in the United States, all the way up to Angela Davis, because the novel came out in 1983. So Angela Davis was recent history, like her imprisonment and subsequent release was recent history. Of course, Angela Davis is alive and well and still giving lectures right here in Birmingham. So that novel is Black history as he understood it and as a constant struggle for liberty that builds on African culture and African influences to create freedom. Now, Manuel Zapata Oliveira is an extremely rare case because he was born in 1920 and he lived near Cartagena de Indias, right? He lived in a town called Lorica. And Cartagena de Indias is kind of like if you cut and pasted San Juan in Colombia.
I've been to Cartagena.
There you go.
Actually, yeah.
Right. Well, just for the listener, it's not Bogota. Bogota is cut and paste New York up in the Andes, right? It feels Caribbean. They talk Caribbean. They love to dance. The music. A lot of people like a little bit of rum every now and then, and so it feels like you're in the Caribbean. But in this space, Black man who eventually would be a Black man with an afro because that was part of his activism to be trained as a medical doctor, right? He went to the university, and it's the same story. He was taught at home by his father, and he went to the university in Bogota, and he was one of two Black people in his entire class, right? So he's an exceptional person that in his success kind of proves the rule, that there were immense barriers of class and race to an education at the time. And he overcame a lot, and he even rebelled against his own father in that his father wanted to participate in what they call Black uplift. No one else is going to help us, so we've got to help ourselves to rise through education, professional success, to overcome the barriers. It results in very model people. It sometimes leaves out a place for rebellion. And his rebellion was, it's like Motorcycle Diaries, where you see like Che Guevara just riding a motorcycle throughout Latin America. He does that. It basically wanders through Central America, wanders through Mexico, and continues to wander in some form or fashion through the rest of his life throughout the United States, Latin America, Africa. And he later married a Spanish woman. And so he is a very, very unique person who was in the Club de Negros. He was deeply influenced by Langston Hughes from the United States, the great writer. So you've got an intellectual cadre of Black activists that were very passionate, but very reduced in their impact in Colombia, partially because you've got places, it's a very fragmented country. It feels like 5 or 6 different countries kind of stuck together, right? In terms of the way people look, the way they talk, and the land that they live in, the environs that they live in. So on the Pacific coast, you've got a large Black population where the infrastructure is going to feel more like Haiti in a lot of places. Quibdó, you'll have people that don't have plumbing or electricity in their houses, and that's not uncommon. And so to reach that population, Manuel Zapata Olivella does what he can do as an individual and as an individual working in intellectual spaces. Black activism and Black history and education doesn't really pick up steam until the turn of the 21st century. At the end of the 1980s, you've got a new constitution in Colombia. You have a law called Law 70, which says that Black rights are also protected by the Constitution, where there's a legal incentive to identify as Black, right? Because if you say, I am Black and I got turned down for a job for being Black, or someone accosted me for being Black, then the government can intervene, right?
Sure.
That has an impact on education. So you have what's called etnoeducación, ethnicity education, like etnoeducación, which is what we would call Black history, Black studies, that is being very slowly, in a very imbalanced manner, being spread out through schooling to these more marginalized areas. And it's having a broader impact than Zapata could have had alone, or even as an intellectual in intellectual circles. So Colombia has been a leader in the last 20 years in the United Nations interventions in Latin America to promote the study and understanding of Black culture and Black rights. Puerto Rico has a different story because of its connections with the United States. So Puerto Rico, you have people who are reacting directly to the Harlem Renaissance, right? We're talking the 1920s. You've got the Schomburg Library in New York, the famous collection of books by and about Black people.
Okay.
Arturo Schomburg was Puerto Rican, an Afro-Puerto Rican who was part of the Harlem Renaissance. You've got the 1960s and 1970s. You've got the Young Lords, which were Puerto Ricans who were activists that had, some of them had afros, like they were styling themselves after the Black Power movement. You got Marta Moreno Vega, who's an author and an activist and a scholar on art that has done a lot for visual art, largely because of the influence of growing up in Harlem, surrounded by, yes, Puerto Ricans, but also African Americans. So there's been cross-pollination in the United States. And you've got precursors in Puerto Rico on the island. So there's this kind of island versus United States divide. Like if you're Puerto Rican and live in the United States, you see the world differently than on the island. But in the last 15 years in Puerto Rico, because of the United Nations support, because of the Mellon Foundation's support, financial support, you see great conferences happening like the Cumbre Afro. You see your first Black Studies program afrodescendencia y racialidad, they call it. They wanted to put their own spin on it, so they came up with their own name. And so you can study African American studies in Puerto Rico. You've got all these great activist groups that have done so much to preserve and expand Black culture there. Puerto Rico has seen itself as a non-Black country for many reasons, one of which is its Black population is smaller than Cuba's, because it was not the gigantic sugar plantation and tobacco plantation that Cuba was, but they did have a Black population. And many people would think that, okay, the Black people are just these people in this little area that have been, it's called Loíza, which is, yes, a great source of folklore. There's been a lot of denial of people's family past, because historically, if you said, oh, I'm mixed, and I'm much lighter than so-and-so, right? I'm higher up the chain than someone else, then that history still carries a lot of weight. But because of the relationship with the United States, there have been more Black thinkers and earlier Black thinkers. Brazil is kind of a midpoint between the two in some ways. Brazil has always talked about Black people in their midst because they couldn't ignore them. It's the largest Black population outside of Africa. But the things that they've said around them have changed. So in the 1960s, and even before that, you've got a group called the Teatro Experimental do Negro, TEN. It's an experimental theater group led by a man named Abdias do Nascimento, Abdias, right? And this guy is, sometimes you may wonder, well, what would Martin Luther King have done had he lived, right? Thankfully, Abdias did live through many trials. But he started a theater group for Black people, and he eventually went into politics, and he became a senator. And so you have a great leader of the 1960s that is informed, yes, by the Cuban Revolution, and he calmed down after that. After you read his early stuff, and it's like, yeah, you like Marx a lot, man. That doesn't necessarily get you elected senator. So as he evolved, he kind of took, okay, we'll step away from Marx, but we're going to step a little closer to Afrocentric thought, which I think was more in line with his goal from the get-go, which is to promote African culture and African rights, Afro-Brazilian culture and rights. And so you've got him as a precursor, but you've got another important publication in the 1980s called Cadernos Negros, which published a lot of the authors that I write about. And so you've got Black culture being very visible. Carnival has been very visible. The syncretic religions in Brazil, like Candomblé, are very, very visible. What has been lacking has been political activism and political organization. And you see that much more after the first victory of Lula. I know that there are going to be Brazilians that listen to this and say, but he's corrupt, and he did this, and he did that, and I like the other guy. I'm not saying that Lula is perfect, but it was politically advantageous to him to promote Black culture, to allow Black culture to be visible in government-supported things. So in 2003, you have a law that comes out that says all public schools need to teach Black history and Black culture. Again, much like in Colombia, you have a great law on paper. The implementation has been uneven, depending on the opinion of the school, but it has created backlash in some cases where people will talk about Brasil paralelo, parallel Brazil. And I'm thinking, parallel reality? You may want to work on your branding, guys, where it's like, no, we won't talk about Black people. It's all going to be conquistadors and that kind of thing. So that's happening now. But in Brazil, you've got a much stronger protection for Black rights and for diversity in general because of the mistakes that the Workers' Party has made, which is Lula's party. There's been a lot of backlash to that party. And there's been a conservative backlash, which in some cases is just going to be racist. You've got neo-Nazis in Brazil. You've got fascists in Brazil. You've got people that are undeniably racist. But you've got other more conservative people that say something went wrong under Lula, let's try somebody else. And so that's going to affect Black people because you'll have somebody saying that maybe we should shoot more criminals, and the criminals turn out to all be Black. right? Or we need to do more things to help people buy guns, which in many cases will lead to a lot more Black death. Bolsonaro is famous for being asked, well, what would you do if your son dated a Black woman? Bolsonaro is white. What would your son do if what would you do if your son dated a Black woman? He says, I raised them better than that. I'm not going to put everybody in a box. People voted for Bolsonaro for multiple reasons, but that's going to affect how Black rights are perceived and how it affects Black lives. And it makes Black rights partisan, right? Mm-hmm. There could be a conservative Black caucus. There are individual Black people that supported the Bolsonaro government. But I think that both the advances and the backlash to the party that was partially responsible for those advances are definitely informing Brazilian politics today in a way that is not identical in Colombia. And in Puerto Rico, they're not immune to our own conservative and liberal discourses. And I am sure that there are many Puerto Rican people that say, I don't think that race should be a factor in people's opportunities in life. And so therefore, we should not take actions to protect Black rights. What I always tell my students, because I'm not there to indoctrinate them, is that elections have consequences. And so if Donald Trump is president and his presence, even when he was not in office, has demonstrably changed our politics in the United States, there are going to be ramifications because Bolsonaro said, hey, I'm just tropical Trump. And so when I use my style of, being the guy who says things that others are too afraid to say, when I reject this other party, that I'm doing so as an imitator of Donald Trump, then you see that, okay, you drop a stone in the water, but there are ripples. And so that's affecting Puerto Rico and that's affecting Brazil right now.
I think this ties very well into, you mentioned a little earlier, your new book that you're working on. Can you elaborate and share a little bit about what it is about and also when it's coming out?
Currently, it's called Affect and Diaspora in Brazil. I believe it will come out in 2026. And it is an approach to Afro-Brazilian women's lyric poetry through what we call affect theory. When we say theory in literature classes, we tend to mean philosophy, right? It's somewhere between philosophy and sociology. And I picked lyric poetry because Black women from the 19th century have, in almost every case, written lyric poetry. So that's going to be Maria Firmina dos Reis, which is a woman who was an abolitionist and who wrote novels, but very few people have written about her poetry, all the way up to what they call sarau. Saraus are like a soiree. It's where you would, it's a poetry reading in a celebratory environment that's very popular in the favelas now and amongst Black populations, because it's very influenced in many cases by, not only by activists, but by hip hop. Rap is poetry. And nice. it may not be the kind of poetry that one expected, but it's poetry. You've got that movement of the saraus, and you've also got slam. Slam
what
poetry.
Is slam?
Slam poetry is popular poetry. It's imagine an open mic night. You stand up and you either read a poem or more classically, you recite a poem of your own authorship. It's a kind of a competition to see whose poem is the best. And you have judges just like the hold up a sign with you get a 10 or you get an 11, that kind of thing. And it's a competition to see whose poem really hit home with the audience. Again, it emerged in Chicago, so it's going to have a lot of overlap with hip hop culture. It's not synonymous with it, okay. But it's poetry for the of the masses for the masses, right? It's something that anybody can get involved with. It's very popular in high schools. It's very popular in high schools in Brazil, and it's very popular in favelas, like amongst disadvantaged students, about marginalized students, because it's like the music they listen to. Brazil has its own brand of rap called funky. It's a space where there's been a blossoming of Black authors in the last 10 years. So if you look at the 19th and 20th century, I'm studying 5 authors because women had limited access to publishing. In the last 10 years, I haven't counted them, but it's 30.
Can you not self-publish?
You can self-publish.
It's harder?
It is harder. Cadernos Negros, the famous publication that started in 79 is when it started, is to this day self-published. It goes through a peer review process, but it's this notion of creating something from nothing. You can self-publish, but the book market in Brazil has historically been elitist. So books are expensive and they have very limited runs. So it's like 1,000 a year, and then poof, the book disappears. The internet has helped a lot. That's been another huge impact. YouTube, TikTok, people are getting poetry out the way that they can. And so in many ways, they have access to publication of a different sort than they did in the past.
Okay, well, that's a good thing.
Absolutely.
That's how you realize, well, technology has a positive impact in people's lives. This next part is all about you, the listeners. It's time for From Here to You. This is where a question from the audience gets passed directly to you. Today's question for our guest comes from Sam. What is your favorite Brazilian dish?
Ooh, that one's easy. It's stroganoff, but it's not like any of the stroganoff I've eaten. I do not speak as a person who knows a lot about Russia. I am sure that I'll eat Russian stroganoff one day and say, this is not what they told me it was. When I was coming up, stroganoff was a noodle dish with some beef on it, and it had a brown sauce. Stroganoff, at least in my wife's family and my family now, it has ketchup, it has hearts of palm, it has a creamy sauce to it, and it's served on rice, on white rice. And then, for good measure, you top it off with what they call pikiniki, shoestring potatoes.
Okay.
You know
Is it the curly ones?
No.
Or
it's take a step down. The formality of these potatoes. Shoestring potatoes are, imagine like a potato chip, a tiny little strip of one, and they come in kind of a jug. And the most popular brand is Picnic brand.
Oh.
Yeah, but in Brazil they pronounce it as Pikiniki.
Pikiniki.
Yeah,
oh, that's
so
cute.
Yes. So you put your Pikiniki on your stroganoff and enjoy it with your rice. It's a very tasty dish, and it's one I associate with home. So I would recommend it to anybody.
Wow, maybe we need your wife's recipe for that. That's awesome. Before we finish, I want to bring things back to readers and listeners who might want to learn more. Could we pre-order your book, and also about just authors in general that you would recommend to just get to learn a little bit more about the Black authors from Brazil or other Caribbean authors that you think have an impact and that should be more known?
My book is not out yet, but thank you for that interest. If you would like to follow its progress, you can contact me at jtmaddox, Maddox, @uab.edu. But if you want to learn more about Afro-Brazilian women's literature, I would start out with a book called Cadernos Negros, Black Notebooks, which is a translation. It's a book. It's a book compiled of poetry and short stories from Cadernos Negros and translated into English. Niyi Afolabi is the organizer for that one and the translator. So anything associated with Black notebooks is a good place to start. I know the pronunciation is going to throw people off, so I'm going to go straight to an English pronunciation. So Abdias, Abdias, Nascimento, Nascimento. His works have been translated into English. So I think we need more translators to get these poets' works out. You can read most of Machado's work. Even Susan Sontag, the great literary critic, wrote about Machado de Assis. So Machado, or Machado, you would say in Spanish, de Assis, Assis. His great works have been published. Obviously, he's male, but he is a Black author writing in the 19th century. Carolina Maria de Jesus, Child of the Dark, is very easy to find edition of her diaries. There's a scholar named Levine or Levine, I don't know how he says his name, but he released the complete diaries of Carolina Maria de Jesus, D-E, and then just like Jesus, but it comes out as Jesus, which most Americans don't.
Yeah, would not understand it this way.
Yeah, so I think that those are, and of course, Poncia Vicencio. It's a name, Poncia, Poncia, Vicenco, CIO, is the translation of her most influential novel. It's about a Black family's life after the abolition, just after the abolition of slavery in Brazil. So it's going to have parallels with Roots. But it's a shorter read, and she's a very engaging author. There are going to be some scenes that are difficult to read, but they're important to recognize. And so Poncia Vicencio is another great starting point. And I'm sure that one day soon we'll have Sarao and slam, those Islam, right? Slam poets that are publishing in English as well. But I don't think that most of them are there yet. But you've got a strong basis with these exemplary writers from Brazil.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. And all the recommendations, we'll make sure to add them in the show notes. So if anyone is interested, they can learn more about these authors, but also about your book coming up and just stay in the know on that for when it comes in 2026. Thank you, Dr. Maddox, for sharing your journey. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, make sure to give a follow to From Where to Here. In the meantime, keep exploring. Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to From Where to Here. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who loves discovering new cultures. Follow us on Instagram at From Where to Here Pod for exclusive updates, behind the scenes moments, and a peek at upcoming guests. Until next time, keep learning, keep connecting, and keep celebrating the beauty of languages and cultures. À bientôt!